Alright, welcome to the Unsung podcast. My voice has went down 2 octaves since last week.
This is where he's going to ask you for some change, and he is literally going to ask you for some change. Take it away, big man.
So, I hate to go on the beg, but sometimes we need a wee bit of cash in these hard times. So, if you want to make a wee donation to our pockets so we can actually buy a coffee and get by, go to unsungpod.net/donate, where you can either join our Patreon or put some money in our fucking tip jar, right?
Here, what's that Patreon all about? What happens when you join that?
It's a long-term commitment where we give you good shit and you get like access to episodes, and you also get access to our access all area access place.
That sounds absolutely fucking pro. I love access.
Dear international listeners, I will give you my Edinburgh BBC accent now to translate. What my colleagues were just advising you of is that if you go to unsungpod.net/donate, you can now send us a small isolated sum of money rather than subscribe and make that commitment, because some people are averse to commitments. This is an easy transaction. We shall not hold on to your details or pester you in future. We will just continue to make this high quality product for your listening pleasure. Now we will return you to your regularly scheduled programming, which I believe is Jackie Bird and a bunch of dancers. So this is, I mean, if you're listening to this and you've never heard Unsung podcast before, this is part 2, so you should go back and listen to part 1 of Faith No More. This is the Unsung podcast. I'm Chris, that's Mark, that's David, and this is the thing that we don't do often enough, which is to remind people exactly what this is. And this is a show where we try and talk about records that are unsung classics in their own way, under-recognised albums of big artists, such as is the case this week, or smaller artists that deserve more recognition. And then occasionally we deviate that because frankly it's pretty fucking boring to do that every week in, week out, so we just set ourselves wee challenges, such as the ABBA mixtape, which will be coming up very soon, and will be a 10-track playlist of what we consider to be the finest ABBA moments, that is as a reward for the good behaviour of listeners out there that chose to subscribe, because there's fucking thousands of yous and almost none of yous contribute to the show. Thanks for that. You fucking 1-star reviews. So we are going to continue where we left off. We say last week. We're not going to pull the wool over your eyes here. It's been about 3 minutes for us, but we are going to do Faith No More from the period of 1995 onwards. Go back and listen to episode 1 if you haven't. That covers the early days. 1979 this band started. Mental. But covers the early days, covers the really big albums, especially The Real Thing and Angel Dust, in reasonable depth. Has some hot takes, talks about shit quite a lot, but that's just what happens. So, taking us forward, in the year 1995, Faith No More brought out the album King for a Day, Fool for a Lifetime, which is the album that I have nominated as an unsung classic. We will return to that in greater detail shortly. That album was followed first of all, it was followed by a tour with Limp Bizkit, which is frankly fucking staggering, but that tour accompanied Album of the Year, the modestly titled what would that be, 6th studio album by Faith No More,
yes,
which was released in 1997. This one actually featured a guy called John Hudson on guitar, who was Billy Gould's old roommate from way back in the day, and funnily enough, Album of the Year got to number 1 in Australia, like number 1 in the charts, which is, that's cool. That's fucking mad, eh? Yeah. Mm-hmm. But the sales, not so great. The sales figures for Album of the Year are actually very, very similar to King for a Day, which is, I mean, a fraction of the 2 albums that came prior to that. The reasons for that we'll probably establish shortly, but it's It's much, much darker. I mean, the Faith No More you're dealing with now is just not the kind of funk rock neon frat boys jumping about in Dayglow shorts, and it's just nothing like that at all. The cover of the album of the year alone looks like some sort of weird 1930s East European sort of interwar period reference. Something quite unsettling about it. The album actually has a sort of thread of that running through it that's quite weird, a thread of sort of, I wouldn't say fascism, but like sort of proto-fascism. There's the Paths of Glory, for example, being the titles of one of the tracks later on. Yeah, there's something quite sinister about it. One of the standout tracks by a mile for me is a song called Strip Search, which is this dark, almost like electro thing that they did. It's a really beautiful song, actually. I think it's a really, really good bit of music. It has an amazing video, a kind of concept piece of Mike Patton sort of getting up, getting dressed, setting out from his apartment, walking across fields, and it's clearly sort of slightly dystopian or authoritarian state that he's walking through. It looks like, it's Eastern European sort of thing. And again, it kind of contributes to that overall atmosphere. The video has a great twist in it. I wouldn't ruin it. You should watch it. It's a wonderful song. It's one of his best vocal performances, I think, as well. The album doesn't really lend itself to singles very well, which perhaps explains its partly explains some of its sort of disappointing performance, but it did have a single called Ashes to Ashes, which was the sort of advanced single on it. It's a fucking great tune. It's an really odd tune, an oddly written song, but the vocal performance by Patton in it is like spectacular.
He's at his peak here, I think. Vocally, I think he's at his peak.
He really, really is. It's a big song. He's got a big voice. Actually, did you ever see Faith No More on Top of the Pops for Ashes to Ashes?
No,
but Faith, they've made some appearances on Top of the Pops over the years. Some of them are a little bit sort of tongue in cheek. The one they made with Ashes to Ashes has an interesting backstory though, because Mike Bordon couldn't be there. I think he was having a baby at the time, and so they recruited somebody called Robin Guy, who was the drummer in the band Rachel Stamp.
Rachel Stamp, who I remember for maybe the singer had blue hair. I think that's literally the only thing I remember about them. They were a sort of glam rock sort of vibe from like London.
Yeah, exactly. They were kind of part of that Brit rock thing, but they were like the glam sort of Bolan-esque sort of side of the Brit rock thing. But Robin Guy was a big fan of Faith No More, and he got a call from I think his agent saying, Faith No More are going to do Top of the Pops, do you want to stand in for them? I got this story off a video where he's talking to Davina McCall. I can't remember the show. It's like Closure or something, the name of the show. I don't even remember it, but it's where people go on TV to get closure on big moments from their past, and Robin Guy goes on to get closure in this instant with Faith No More. But long story short, he gets called in to replace Mike Bordon. He's fucking stoked about it because he's a big Faith No More fan. He learns Ashes to Ashes on drums, and they're like, well, it doesn't matter, we just want you to wave your hands about. It's backing tracked. Mike's singing, that's it. But he's like, oh, it doesn't matter, phoning all his friends and his mum, I'm playing Faith No More. And then they're like, oh, we need you to wear a baby mask. Right? They basically gave him this giant puffy faced mask, and the joke was that their drummer Mike Bordon's nickname was Puffy. he gets referenced in the lyrics as Puffy as well. So he was going to wear a puffy mask to be Mike Borden, right? And he's like, oh, really though? Do I have to? Plus, it's going to be difficult. And they were like, well, it doesn't matter if it's difficult. It doesn't matter if you hit the drums. It's a backing track. So he's trying to persuade them not to, but eventually agrees to do it. Genuinely agrees to do it. He goes out to play and they start playing the song, and in his description he's like about 20 seconds 30 seconds into the song, the elastic on one side of the mask snaps and the mask falls onto his drum. So he was like, as he's playing, he's like, shit, do I try and refasten this? Or he just is like, no, I can't, and he just like bashes it off the drum kit to the side of the stage and keeps playing. At which point the band are playing. Mike Patton apparently was drinking a glass of champagne, and that was kind of quite in keeping with that period of when they're all suited up and stuff for Ashes to Ashes. And he turns round and sees that Robin Guy has taken the mask off, and they assume he's done it on purpose. So Mike Patton just extends his middle finger to him and just swears right in his face live on TV. And then there was actually like letters of complaint into like the newspapers and the BBC, Points of View, remember that show? About no wonder the teenagers today are so disrespectful when they see this kind of thing happening on TV, and this is all because Faith No More thought that Robin had ripped that off his face to be a wido, and so he went on this TV show just to sort of clear the air. As it were. This is actually the song where my mum started crushing on Mike Patton.
Wow.
I'm serious. My mum, like, I remember this came out when I was 16, and I was playing it, and my mum was like, put that song on again, and she got really into Faith No More. Obviously not all of it, and certainly not the kind of nasal Real Thing stuff, but she started to develop a real fondness for Mike Patton's voice. And then when she saw him, she was just about it. Frankly, it was a little bit awkward, but yeah, she got really into Mike Patton. She actually around about that time got really into Tool as well, which was kind of hip, There you go. But yeah, I mean, he is so good in that song. It's hard not to be impressed. The album has some real fucking lowlights as well. There's a kind of lounge cabaret song called She Loves Me Not, which is fucking stinking.
It's not very good.
There's a punk metal song on it called Got That Feeling, which I really like, and which kind of picks up where some of the stuff in King for a Day left off.
Got that feeling, like a loving. I got that feeling, but I can't stop winning.
And there's two really dense, dark songs near the end, 10 and 12, Paths of Glory and Pristina. They're so oppressive and slow and doomy, like really doomy, really sinister. And they were effectively the last thing the band did, people thought, maybe ever, because they broke up. Was it the year after they broke up? Did they even get as far as that? But yeah, I mean, the way that this album ends, it's very pessimistic. It's very uneasy. I do really like this album, albeit that's with the caveats that it's got a few stinkers on it, but some of the tracks are tremendous.
Yeah. I quite like Collision and Last Cup of Sorrow. I think those two songs are really good.
Yeah, I mean, Last Cup of Sorrow.
Collision's first tune, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's a big start. And Last Cup of Sorrow was one of the other singles as well. An odd choice, maybe, but
it got some pelters from reviewers when it came out.
Yeah, man.
There were some really, really bad reviews.
This album and King for a Day, man, they get so much flack for both of those records, and I think it's completely unfounded. And Pitchfork gave the album of the year 2.4 out of 10, which is fucking ridiculous, man.
Yeah, Rolling Stone 1.5 out of 5.
Wow.
Fast Forward Weekly 1 out of 5. It seems like a lot of these reviewers were comparing it to younger bands and like new metal and stuff like that. And the narrative just seemed to be that this was a band that had their, success in the 90s, used to be cool, and they were just old farts now, even though it's 1998.
97. It's 97. When it came out. Yeah, I mean,
what did Pitchfork say?
Bizkit.
Album of the year leaves one feeling like waking up and finding last night's used Condon. Sure, the ride was fun while it lasted, but what remains is just plain icky, and you definitely don't want it in your CD player.
It's just a rubbish review, isn't it? It doesn't make any sense. I mean, the thing is as well, that album review must have been done retrospectively, because Pitchfork was barely a glint in some wee keyboard warrior's eye back in 1997. So some smart arse has decided to appraise it retrospectively and still come to the wrong conclusion. Whether or not you think it's a great record, it's the panning that it seems to get is I don't understand it. Frankly, fucking hell. Even Album of the Year has fared and aged a hell of a lot better than most of the new metal contemporaries that surrounded it.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. I think like a lot of the folk that were reviewing it were going, "Oh, this isn't Limp Bizkit, or this isn't
Cold Chamber." My God,
exactly. Oh, these are like these old Stuck in the Muds that were doing funk and rap. They haven't down-tuned their guitars or anything. That happened, it was over within 4 years, and then Faith No More have stood the test of time a lot more than pretty much every new metal record.
I just didn't know the reception was quite as bad as you guys are now exposing. I didn't realise that.
I think this period of metal is really weird, because unless you were a new metal band or doing something that was more trad, like in terms of thrash or death metal, bands that were a bit alternative like this and like Helmet and stuff they were seen as being dinosaurs, even though they've stood the test of time far better than any other new metal contemporaries did. And they're just kind of tied to this idea of, these guys were definitely like the proto new metal bands. Well, they clearly weren't.
I mean, just and try to be objective about it in the same way that grunge, I use that advisedly, but the interesting grunge swept away the kind of hair metal that was treading water in the early 90s. There's obviously hair metal in the 80s. It was fun and exciting, and even though I'm not a huge fan of it, I can get why it was so popular. But a lot of those bands like Poison and Ugly Kid Joe and all these fucking bands that were kicking around in the early 90s they were the tail end of that. And to be fair, Faith No More, Helmet, by this point, we're starting to really tread water. Jesus Lizard treading water, arguably, at this point as well. So a lot of the really edgy bands from the early 90s that were part of that fresh movement had only got maybe 5 or 6 years down the road, and then they were starting to sound a little bit redundant. So, I mean, I get why Faith No More split up after this as well, because you weren't getting a fair shake, because metal had got its revenge. This time a big stupid variation of metal came along and sort of got payback for grunge and alternative stuff sweeping away its predecessor in the late 80s and early 90s. I mean,
what's interesting, just one of those reviews of Album of the Year said, "Thanks for the music. Faith No More shouldn't be thought of as a one-hit wonder band, but they've done all they can." And then that reminded me, actually, it's interesting that from a certain mainstream perspective, some people think of Faith No More as a one-hit wonder band, which is fucking mad.
Yeah, that is bizarre. I mean, I guess if you go by the average programming on Kerrang TV, though, it sort of makes sense, because Epic became the go-to song.
Yeah, but I mean, even then on alternative music channels like that, they've still got 6 or 7 big hits.
I mean, even Easy is a song that, their version of Easy is debatably more heavily played than any other now.
But anyway,
so that wasn't actually their last album. But 2009, I think, word had kind of started to seep out. They'd originally dismissed it, and then they did reform and start doing a bunch of shows and tours, which obviously surprised a lot of people. There was no sign then of any new records coming out. The record Sol Invictus didn't appear until 2015.
Yeah, I mean, their first performance was at Download Festival, and it was streamed on Download's website. I watched it because I fucking love the band. And you can actually watch it on YouTube, and they're really great. They open with a Peaches and Herb cover of Reunited, which is fun. And it's just crazy. They still sound so vital and so of the moment. There, a lot of the songs are playing alongside bands that are clearly very influenced by them. You know, check it out if you haven't seen it.
There was a bit of a gap. It's like they played a few shows over the next couple of years and then it sort of petered out. And then in 2014 they supported Black Sabbath in Hyde Park and played 2 new songs. It turned out they were going to release an album the next year.
Yeah, Sol Invictus. It's a slightly problematic name. I don't think for a minute that Faith No More meant it in a problematic sense, but it has its associations with white nationalism and the far right, especially in Europe. But it's not a great record. I mean, it's fine. I don't think it's a bad record. I think it sort of sounds like a collection of B-sides from the Album of the Year era, though. There's some ideas in it. There's like acoustic guitar and stuff that ties in with some of that period. I think the song Superhero is probably the most interesting and it's probably the most consistent with the previous standards that they'd set. Black Friday on that record, track 7, has a very Tomahawk chorus. Bearing in mind that Mike Patton had been doing some pretty good stuff with Tomahawk prior to that, and the vocals as well are the kind of double vocal effect is a lot more akin to the kind of Tomahawk work. Motherfucker, which was their first single back, it's the 8th track on the album, and I feel like it's almost a good idea. But it's a bit too basic. I'd kind of be surprised if Patton loves that Sol Invictus album. I feel it's something Faith No More did, but I think I never really know what to make of Patton's decisions, like I've said, because some of the bands have ended up touring, but it doesn't seem to meet the standards they'd set. And regardless of what people said about Album of the Year, it's a good record. It's got some very, very good moments on it, and Faith No More had pretty high standards from the Patton era onwards. I just don't think this really lives up to it. It feels like a collection of rarities rather than an album. Have you spent any time with Sol Invictus?
Yeah,
it sort of slipped under the radar for a lot, even of Faith No More fans. I know that. Yeah,
I listened to it when it came out in 2015. I think it's fine. Superhero, as you said, is a good song. I quite like Separation Anxiety as well. I think that's pretty cool, and Rise of the Fall's pretty cool as well. But yeah, it's fine. It's dead short as well. It's the shortest album they've made by far. It's only 39 minutes long.
Yeah, I kind of filed it away along with the new Refused record and the new... Did At the Drive-In do a new record? I can't remember if they did. Yeah, they did. And it's like, alright, these are bands that are good musicians and they know what they're good at, but all they've done is they've just completed a record because they want to tour. And they're not completing a record because they want to write tunes that'll change their lives or whatever. Yeah,
it doesn't feel like they've got a vital thing bursting to get out of them. It feels like they've said, oh, we should write an album rather than we need to write an album.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I listened to it when it came out and it just, I was like, well, no, I mean, I'll just listen to their old stuff, thanks.
So I guess that kind of brings us up to date.
Are they still together officially?
Yeah.
I'm not actually sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
oh yeah, of course they were.
due to play with Corn, Dave.
Well, apparently there was. It was booked for last March, but they were supposed to play a show in LA with Korn, System of a Down, Helmet, and Russian Circles.
My God, man! Imagine your face at that show. Just
my God.
The priapism.
It has been rescheduled to May 2021, but I mean that'll get rescheduled again. But
yeah, they were supposed to play here in June 2020, and it's been rescheduled to June 2021 because I've got a ticket.
Yeah,
Dave, I could see you going to the States for that lineup. I'm not even joking, man. I mean, so before we actually dissect King for a Day, the one thing that we've shown, I think, is that they're not a band that deal brilliantly in subtlety early on, and I think their biggest moments, both commercially and perhaps even in the later days, their most interesting moments are the least subtle. And by subtle, I mean like some of the songs are subtle, so the likes of Evidence on the album we're going to talk about, or Easy, tracks like that actually are very unsubtle in the fact that they catch you so off guard, or Edge of the World, as we spoke about as well, because you've got a metal band doing this big pompey stadium funk rock, and then they do this lounge track. And I think Faith No More were kind of quite extrovert in that sense. They're quite comical, a bit larger than life at a lot of points, and it's something that brought them a lot of commercial success. As they got more nuanced, they got less successful. But they spent years and years developing basically no sound. They spent years trying to shake any specific sound other than perhaps this meta notion of larger than life, which became their thing. And I think nothing could be more informative of where they go in the album we're about to talk about, because this is an album of a band that is determined not to have a sound, I think.
Yeah, it dabbles in the extremities of everything they could do sonically, with an entirely new guitar player as well, which is a whole vibe in and of itself. Yeah,
for the first time in a long time as well. Yeah, this is the first time the other three kind of core members of the band have played with a new guitarist. Dave, you actually mentioned the cover earlier on about how it's so iconic. It's actually from a graphic novel called Flood by Eric Drucker. Really, really brilliant cover. Like, it really stuck in my head from the early days. It's just such a fucking brilliant, striking image. I was a big fan of that. It did have really low sales compared to the two albums prior, fraction of them. It wasn't the first thing they released without Jim Martin. That was actually the tune that they did for the Judgment Night soundtrack with the Booyah Tribe. Remember that? Yeah. Another Body Murdered, I think it's called, which we've spoken about that soundtrack at length. They really transition on this record. They continue an evolution, I think, where the silliness becomes, I think, more apparently self-aware. I mentioned that earlier on, where in the earlier stages of Faith No More, when they say things like it's so groovy, it's out of sight, I'm not entirely sure if that's ironic, whereas by this point I'm pretty confident that the things that seem OTT are definitely ironic. They've established that, and they just are better at telling the jokes, if that's a kind of appropriate way to put it. In this album, the synths play a much, much smaller role in particular. King for a Day, for a Lifetime.
A lot of songs, there's not even any synth on it.
Yeah, no, obviously, I take it you guys know the reason for that.
Yeah.
Roddy Bottum had lost his father around about this time. He's also, as we mentioned in the first episode, he was very close to Courtney Love. Clearly, Cobain killed himself in 94. He spent a lot of time with her around that period. And also, something which I think is not mentioned and probably plays a fairly large part, let's be honest, is the fact that he became addicted to heroin himself.
It does decrease your productivity.
It seems to, unless your productivity is howling at people in the street and slumping in doorways. But I think This album sounds fucking terrific. It was recorded by Andy Wallace, a guy who's at this time 1994-95. His stock was peak. I mean, he'd exploded with the miracles that he worked on Nevermind, and ever since then he'd been in very high demand. And yeah, the drums in particular, I think, in this record sound terrific.
Now, I mean, I'm going to take this up with you, and this is an issue I have with the album overall. I think the production is too good. I think it's like crystal clear, perfect, thick, and like, so on my first listen to this record, you know, since we decided we were going to do it, which is actually, you know, my first listen to it in about 12 years, it's like the production is like a big sort of jazz band, like Tower of Power or something, like one of these, you know, really white jazz bands. The drums remind me of when you used to go to the pantomime, and like the drummer down in the orchestra pit would have like the most amazing pearl kit, and it would just sound fucking amazing. And you know, he was obviously an incredible session drummer, and it was you know, mic'd up to hell. It's got all the production, but to me it just somehow loses a bit of character. And then another thing that I guess runs through it slightly is, I mean, the guitars sound fucking massive on this, much fatter, a lot more low end. Most of the instruments are double tracked, especially guitars, and I think that weirdly enough leaves Mike's vocals actually sounding a little thin sometimes, because he is I don't think he's double tracking his vocals or whatever. He's just coming out with one fucking amazing performance, and he's got incredible technique and he's doing amazing melodies, but the actual, compared to how thick the guitars sound, it just leaves him slightly flat sometimes. Yeah, it sounds weird saying that Mike Patton is overwhelmed by the production, but I just think his voice is overpowered by the rest of the instruments on this sometimes.
I mean, I think it's an interesting point. I would say it's probably why this album feels more like an alternative rock album to me than a metal album. Yeah, sonically, it is thicker and dirtier and a bit more. It doesn't have the pop production where, as you say, the vocal is really pushing right out of the mix the way that like Epic does. But it sort of ages better as a result for me. It feels a bit more underground, a bit rawer. It's a better. We'll put it this way, right? Nevermind was a huge thing for Andy Wallace, right? But it was also overcooked, especially in the eyes of Kurt Cobain. I think this is a much better balance, and it does a lot of favours for a band that was a metal band but is not produced like a metal band on this. So yeah, I mean, I take that on board, but I think in a weird way that might be part of what really switches me on it.
Well, yeah, that's another thing, is that I think Faith No More, they may be a band that the album that you get into first is the one that defines the sound of them to you. So for me, I heard Everything Is Ruined when I was 7, and Angel Dust became my go-to record, and therefore when I listen to this, I'm like, oh no, guitars are too fat, specific things aren't conforming to what I think Faith No More sound like to me, and it's a very nostalgic and emotional connection that I have to that band, and therefore if this was your first record that you got into, then everything else doesn't sound as good as this could be.
See, before Mark jumps in, I would say, don't you think that's exactly what Faith No More wanted though? See, just the way that they operate, that kind of like constantly throwing you curveball like track to track.
Yeah,
they're like,
I totally respect it.
I get what you're saying, you're right. It does often depend on your starting point. And yeah, I'm more of an alternative kid, so this appeals to me more. But I do think it's consistent with that gravitation they made away from like cheeseball funk to something much kind of cooler and more alternative and less immediately classifiable.
Yeah. Mike Patton's on record is saying he prefers the kind of vocal mix where it is lower in the mix, just like another instrument. It just shouldn't be the forefront of the mix, in his opinion, and that's definitely the case in this album. It's also very dry though, which may be something that you're kind of picking up on as well. There's not a lot of reverb on it.
I can add a caveat there. It's not dry. The thing with Andy Wallace is he's such a fucking master of his craft that he's able to put reverbs in where you don't really hear the reverbs. I mean, it's that thing about mixing. Like, you can mix a reverb in so that it's really apparent, or you can actually really... The way that Andy Wallace mixes, like, have you heard those vocal tracks soloed? They're not dry at all, but he's just a bit of a fucking maestro. I don't always like what he does, but he's very high level, you know. And I think this album just has his stamp all over it, like that ability, for better or worse, as Dave's pointing out. This
is an album that's aged, one of the albums that's aged the best. I didn't have much time for this when I was younger, really, because I wasn't really into the kind of vibe of this, but I've grown to love it a lot more as I've grown older, and particularly the production of it.
Let's take a tour. Get Out.
Get out right now.
I mean, Faith No More do a really good job of starting records. Let's just make that really fucking clear. I mean, pretty much every record we mentioned, even the one after this with Collision, they're great at starting records. They don't mess about. You know, just get you straight in, whether it's from out of nowhere as well. You know, just like, all right, it's a party, let's get started. Great immediate start to it. It's the punkiest at this point in their career that they've ever sounded. The drumming on this, I mean, I'd never been a huge fan of Mike Bordon, and looking back at his other stuff, I think it's fine. He's a very competent drummer, a very solid drummer who went on to do other stuff, but he was never outstanding. This is the album for me where Mike Bordon actually does stuff that is properly like air drumming along with it, and this tune is a great example of that. The rolls, the snare rolls in this song in particular, just at the ends of bars and stuff, are just fucking terrific. It's like lean and mean, and it's a really ferocious song. I think it's a fucking brilliant intro to the album, and it really sets out the agenda.
Well, you see straight away, two things jump out to me whenever I hear this. It's one, that's definitely not Jim Martin playing guitar, which means it's definitely a different kind of Faith No More. And two, Patton's voice has just went up a level, and it was already pretty good before.
You know, the guitar in this actually sounds a lot closer to Dwayne Dennison, which is ironic given that he would go on to play with Tomahawk, but that kind of, you're right, it's not metal. It's got much more of a weird, obtuse sort of alternative like slant to it, and I think it just works so well with Mike Patton's his voice at this point in his career. It wouldn't have worked when he was singing through his nose, but it really works at this stage.
Also worth noting that there's no keys in this song, which is interesting, and it's also solely credited to Patton, which is only the second time he's credited as a sole writer on a Faith No More song.
What was the other one?
It was one on Angel Dust. Fuck, can't remember which one it is. I think it's RV maybe.
I mean, RV would make sense. Yeah,
he's only the sole credit on another one.
Second tune, Ricochet. It's an odd choice for a single, but a big fucking tune for the band at this point as well. I don't quite know how they wrote this song. It's a really, really odd, like from a songwriter's perspective, it's very strange. I can't imagine where they started and worked back or worked forward. It builds brilliantly. There's some great scales in it and some nice doubled. This does have some doubled vocals in it.
It does. Yeah, really cool.
Although I think this is one that when the vocals aren't doubled, it's because he deliberately goes off key. And where that would have worked because of the slightly sort of thinner pop production on the previous two records, because you've got such a fucking fat bass and fat guitar under it, you're like, oh, it just sounds like he's out of tune, but he's not out of tune, he's like doing a little flourish. If everything else was a bit lighter, then I think it would sound better.
It does have some sort of slightly wonky scales in it, this one kind of hidden beneath it. It's the second tune in a row as well where they've done this really on-beat snare. You know, the snare is just landing flat, and it's a very confident thing. It's a ballsy thing to do, 2 songs in a row as well. There's a fantastic synth in the pre-chorus to this. Like this is probably the best bit of synth on this album, and the lyrics as well. I think this shows like a sophistication that I mean, lines like "it's always funny until someone gets hurt and then it's just hilarious" became sort of like mantras for Faith No More fans. I mean, there's even like fan sites called that. You know, it's got some great sardonic lyricism in it.
The big chunky riff in the chorus of that song is just amazing. I love it so much, and I love the vocal mix in this, even when it's not double tracked.
I'm a big fan of that song. I'm also a really big fan of the third track, Evidence.
Yeah, it's awesome.
If you want to open the hole, just put your head.
Now, this is something that we were talking about, Edge of the World. That paved the way for all this sort of stuff, this sort of weird, noirish wine bar thing. The video for Evidence is another really, really good one. Mike and the whole band really in shirt and tie, with a glass of wine, kind of rolling the Rioja around in the wine glass, you know, pointing like a lounge singer. There's a lot of like you might say Sinatra. It's much seedier than that. There's kind of Vegas sort of club vibe to it. They're in a glass case getting watched. I think it's a fucking brilliant video. It's really, really in tune with the style of the song. Suave, seedy. It really plays to, I think, what was emerging as Mike Patton's own personal brand. Do you know what I mean? He with the haircut, the tash, the hair gel back, that sort of thing. I think it really, Mike Patton started to get a much stronger sense of identity, and this album is where that was really kind of like congealed, I think. Yeah, really, really big fan of that song.
Yeah, it's definitely jazzy and funky together, which is cool, bringing in the jazz element. I don't think that Jim Arm would not have done that on a guitar. There's a little,
absolutely not.
There's a piano motif that the guitar follows in places that is pure, like, it is the cheesiest 90s fucking like soft jazz cheese in the world, man. It sounds dated as hell now, but I fucking love it as a result.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that we need to, like, when we're talking about jazz here, we're not talking about fucking John Coltrane or Miles Davis.
We're talking about
Michael Bolton. About, yeah, exactly.
Kenny Rogers.
We're talking about Kenny G.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the guitar performance in this song is amazing. See the way he slides into notes. It's just that little thing. It's fucking tremendous. Trace Bruins is a very, very good guitarist, and Mr. Bungle, the variety, the insanity of that group requires such a diverse skill set, and it's totally on display on this album and in this tune in particular. And as if to reinforce that, they follow it with the gentle art of making enemies. A great track title when you're a teenager. Has our lyrics like, "Don't you look so surprised? Happy birthday, fucker."
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like the ultimate thing to get your teeth into as a 14-year-old kid. I fucking love it. It's so silly. Yeah. I mean, it is Faith No More embracing their absurd side, totally, doing like big bold shapes, You
can tell with the way that he pronounces the sibilance in his voice, the way he's singing a lot of the words, the way it's coming out of his mouth, it just is so, you can tell he's fucking around, man. It's so cool. This is my favourite Faith No More song. This is my favourite of all time.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
He is a fucking master of his craft at this point. He really is.
Yeah.
Like, he's there's just so many great vocal performances in the course of this one track. Mm-hmm. I think it's brilliant, and it's also quite proto Tomahawk. It sort of really sets the scene for what he was going to do with Tomahawk, I think. Now, let's really have some fun here. Star AD, track 5. What in the holy fuck was going through their heads when they... I mean, I want to be clear, I used to hate this fucking tune and I love it now, but I love it only because I engaged with it, and that, again, that kind of quite conceptual, like, this is stupid as fuck. Like, what were they doing? Going into this kind of big band 70s funk TV music. It's so tacky, it's so absurd, and it's so unnerving. You know, it's really, there's something really perverse about it. It's like,
It's all over and over and over and over.
like, why are you doing this at the 5th track of an album that you've just had great success? Are you trying to ruin your career? It's mental. I think it's a little bit sociopathic, and it's fucking genius.
Yeah, totally, man. It's,
Over time, it just makes so much sense. Like, not because it's a great song. I mean, it's a fun song, but just because it's demented. The band do not give a fuck, and I think there's something absolutely fucking amazing about that. And also, can we just say the jazz break in it?
Like a fact of history. And when you die, you'll become something worse.
With the spoken word, it's just like, holy shit, man! These guys are not right.
yeah, there's a middle 8 which has got a tremolo on it, and it just sounds
It does,
pure
yeah.
fucking wobbly and whack as fuck, but it's amazing.
The brass in this song is fucking outstanding. It's. I mean, I don't know what the fuck they were on.
has
But it was brilliant.
It's got a guitar solo which is pure funk, like. Hit the Prince buzzer because it could come out of a Prince song. It's just totally
Yeah.
funky, man.
You're absolutely right. I mean, the Prince buzzer is well deserved for that. You're totally. And again, as if to underline how they are just not up for playing ball. Cuckoo for Caca, track 6. Shit lives forever. Like, it's
Shit lives forever, mate.
ugly as sin, man. What a fucking hideous song. Like, that riff at the start with the misanthropy of that with the synths and stuff is so.
Well, that's like proto nu metal. Bands like fucking, I don't know, Spineshank and Seven Dust used that riff 5 years later.
It has a real gothy kind of like, I'm trying to think of a good example of a band, like the church organ vibe. There's something almost like the progression of the chords is black metal-y. It's
Like-
really, really dark.
I've got it's a big cheesy 80s vamp keys. Like it's like something out of a horror film, you know, for the
Yep.
mid 20th century. You can totally hear it in like Rocky Horror Picture Show or something like that. You could, like, that's the vibe it kind of gives me in the choruses, and then it's got some fucking mental riffs, and it's heavy as fucking plays as well, man.
Patton's vocals in it are top shelf.
Good stuff gets you. Shit live forever, 'cause shit live forever.
Honestly, he's done some good takes that sound like they've just been good takes. They don't sound comped. They sound just like he nailed it, and they were like, we're keeping that. That's fucking brilliant. The vocals, they're unhinged. I also like the fact that the lyrics are self-referential. Right up until the end of it was like, take it from our drummer Puff, being good, it gets you stuff.
Yeah. It's very theatrically evil, which I think probably explains it.
It's Phantom of the Opera for like Melvin's fans or something like that. It absolutely is. In fact, even heavier than that. Yeah. Track 7, Caralo Voador.
Pares. Neo dedo enterrado, no neo nares. My lips are moving, but there's no.
Patton, he is a polyglot anyway. Married to an Italian lady, speaks fluent Spanish as well. Don't know. It's peak Patton. This song. It's smoother than Evidence. It's just ultra dank, weird, erotic, kind of drifting in and out the English language. I mean, fuck knows what Mum was doing when she was sitting listening to this. I'd rather not know.
It's got a nice menace to it, man. It feels menacing.
It does. It's menacing, but it's sort of romantic, but with like creepy underpinnings, I think. No other band could have done this and made it work. Like literally no other band at that time could have gone in this direction, because if it sounded like their catalogue, it wouldn't have had the same effect. Like appearing in the context of this album the way it does and being so well executed, it acquires a whole new significance that it wouldn't have had with a band that already sounded like this. It's a great pacer, just even on a very practical level, and again it's quite proto-Tomahawk. The track You Can't Win, which admittedly is a bit more aggressive, but it's got that same sort of like singing in foreign tongue suaveness, but with like predatory underpinnings. Brilliant. And again, oh hey, we did a mellow song, let's get nasty. Ugly in the Morning, track 8. I mean, it's fucking... The vocals on this song are fucking demented.
Rabid.
Feral.
Well, I was going to say it's quite scatty, but I don't mean it like that when we're talking about feral.
Well, it probably is that as well, let's be honest. Yeah, I mean, this is not a band looking to re-record the real thing at this point. If you just, there's like, alright, that's out the window. If you'd listened to Angel Dust and you were thinking, oh, maybe they just did the Dark album and they're going to get pop again, you mean, fuck off, man. At this point, they're very much nailed, like pinned their colours to the mast. This is uncompromising in the extreme, really obtuse. It's got an insane meltdown at the end as well. Just totally rips itself apart. I think the vocals again in this are like Mike Patton. This is what made them famous. Not the song, but this level of eclecticism, but also ability. It's just fucking absolutely brilliant. Top shelf. And hey, here we are. Track 9, Digging the Grave. Genuinely one of the best songs in the 1990s in my book. I think it's... Is that
because it just sounds like Bad Religion?
Doesn't sound like Bad Religion, you fucking...
No, but
heathen.
This is like big power chords.
It's big and cheesy,
like,
man.
Mike is just singing, and it sounds like pop punk, like, to me. It sounds like it could be Offspring or Bad Religion or something.
I think you're a bit jaded.
Jeez.
No, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just like... But
let's turn to our resident expert, Mark. Does this sound like pop punk?
A little, I guess. But they were always in. They were always. I mean, they were hardcore punks to begin with, you know. It doesn't really strike me as being like, I see the song as being big and cheesy, Faith No More sounding. Like
the thing is, the chord changes in this are not pop punk chord changes. The chord changes in this are quite angular. It's much more alt rock. It's quite in keeping with the sort of like edgier 90s stuff, the sort of later kind of period Nirvana. I would say, again, to Mike Borden, this is a phenomenal drum performance in this, in terms of it's just so well written. It's not massively flashy. There's nothing on this that requires some sort of Meshuggah-esque level of drum mania. It's just so brilliantly written. It's great. The drums are a hook on it. You know, you actually find yourself playing along with the flams. It's the bridge bit, the break in the bridge. It's terrific. Every single instrument on this song is pulling its weight, and it's just, I think it's such a great little concise snapshot of everybody in this band fucking killing it. Like, because Patton's vocals in this are excellent, but they're not over the top. they fit the song really, really well.
Yeah.
And I think it really it's all of this explains why it worked so well as a single. Huge song for me, even personally, but I just think a huge song generally. It's a fucking brilliant synopsis of this period of the kind of mid-90s.
Yeah, it's totally a great song. And one of the things that I've written here again is it's got a really good middle eight. You know, when they kind of get a bit of tension and the relief, and then the screaming going into the chorus is so cool, man.
Yeah.
These guys do great middle eights. They always have done. They're one of the few bands that get it right, I think.
What the fuck? I absolutely fucking love track 10, but it has no right in the world to be on this album.
Do you know, it's a shit slow ballad, but it's totally saved by Mike's chorus hook.
Strong. And this ain't easy to say. Take this bottle.
We're talking about take this bottle, right? And even saying the words take this bottle immediately in my head.
Bottle.
Take this bottle.
I mean, that hook is that song. Everything else, but like everything else is supposed to be shit to be then saved by how good that is.
The thing is that even the verse though, that I don't want to love, like that whole thing, it's fucking I mean, it's preposterous. It's absolutely fucking preposterous. It just doesn't make any fucking sense. Yet, retrospectively, it makes total sense. I also think like the ending of this tune, that fucking fade out, is genius, because he just keeps going, and if you turn up your stereo as it's fading, you can hear that he actually starts to vary the vocal take. You know, he starts to fuck around, but they obviously faded out, or maybe the take, they didn't like it beyond that point. But the fade out actually is very, very interesting if you chase it with your volume knob. I recommend you do that. Actually, it's really cool.
I think the synth strings are really good in this. There is some cool synth strings on this whole record. Actually, this was written by Billy Gould in his own, which is quite interesting, I think. And there's more tremolo on this, like the
it's got, well, one of the things that makes this is the whammy, the guitar whammy, it's one of the best examples of whammy in an alternative rock thing context. Track 11, King for a Day, the title track. It's probably sonically the closest to Sol Invictus, the last album. The strummed acoustic guitars, multi-tracked. It's kind of like breezy and distinct. The piano is vital to this song, because see, if you listen to it and try and imagine the piano not being there, it's actually quite upbeat. But then the piano plays these really sinister, diminished chords underneath it that add all of that kind of like oppressive weirdness and discomfort. It really comes from them. So like the key work in this is crucial. It gets really, really big and mean. And then it obviously descends into that whisper of "Don't let me die with." Don't let me die with that silly look in my eyes. That tapering refrain at the end. I think it's terrific as well.
The bass sound in that song is amazing, by the way. It's got an actual bass solo almost in it, which is kind of cool. Also, this is the only song that's credited that's got Bottom as a credit on it, and he's not credited in any other song on this album, which is quite interesting.
Yeah.
I think this sounds like an end of an album track. I think it's
it
like
does.
Got a big sort of euphoric sort of vibe to it. That's also got a sort of dark undertone. But
so here's actually, it's an interesting point, right? Because I think with any other band it could very well have been, because we're on track 11 and it's a good time to finish an album, really, isn't it? Interestingly enough, I think the next two tracks, What a Day and The Last to Know, are probably the least essential tracks on the album.
I agree.
I don't dislike them by any means. I think What a Day probably sounds the closest to old Faith No More. It probably sounds the closest to like sort of Real Thing era Faith No More.
What a day, if you can look in the face and punch up on it. What a day.
it also just uses the same riff that they've used in Ricochet or Gentle Art as well, like that sort of.
Yeah, the delivery's quite different. It's a bit funkier though. It's got more of that kind of like much earlier 90s sound to it.
I think it sounds like a new metal song.
A wee bit, yeah, absolutely. One thing about it, it's got Mike Patton starting to really play with vocal effects processing. Did you hear that?
Yeah.
You know how it became a big part of their sets where he'd have that little vocal effects unit, and this was what he did with Tomahawk and a lot of his other projects. So that song really features that, and it's got a good hook at the end. But it is probably the song I'd cut first if I was cutting. And The Last to Know, I think, is good. It's sort of like an attempt to do a euphoric, grand, sort of sweeping alt-rock thing. It's weirdly optimistic, spacious, and has like a Soundgarden-esque sort of jam section.
Yeah, it's definitely got that sort of post-grungy vibe. This would be a first one off for me. I just think the word I have is plodding.
That's what I've written stodgy. This is kind of one of these songs that Faith No More often fall into this trap, is where they'll do like a mid-tempo number that shouldn't really be on the album, and most of their albums have that on it, I think. So
the thing is, right, if Faith No More hadn't stopped at King for a Day and they'd finished with these two songs, you'd be like a little bit let down. But for me, they redeem it with the fucking absolute unadulterated genius that is Just a Man.
Fucking hell, man.
Track 14. This ridiculous gospel masterpiece that should never in a million years have ever fucking worked, and honestly it's one of my favourite things on it. I think it's almost comical in its cheesiness.
I will not touch you, I am just a man. Man was born to love, though often he has sought, like Icarus,
and it is totally joyous with the fucking layers of gospel singers, Patton starting to riff on the vocals, like really, I mean, I just think it's terrific. And I kind of have a feeling that the only reason those two songs are on before it is to allow it to be there, man. It's an inconsistent ending to the album, because the album up until track 11 is fucking absolutely rock solid, and then it sort of takes a lot of chances, maybe unnecessary chances, with these last three songs. But I do think the last one pays off in a big fucking way.
Yeah,
like, I love Just a Man. Mark, you were saying to me, you were texting me earlier on saying you couldn't get that fucking hook out your head.
It starts off so innocuous and mellow, and then Patton's melodies kind of sort of quarrel almost, and you're kind of thinking to yourself, this sounds really weird, this doesn't work. And then the first chorus comes in and you're kind of like, that sounds like a gospel chorus, but not. What the fuck's that all about? And then it becomes a fucking gospel song.
Chorus.
What?
But what's also interesting is, like, he sounds like he's taking the piss, and it's got this like sly sadness and slight of, you know, usual comic thing happening with him in the verse, but he actually sounds genuine and emotional in the chorus. I think he doesn't actually sound like he's taking the piss, and that's what I think helps it as a closer, because you're like, oh, this whole thing hasn't just been covered in irony. They actually, you know, they are kind of serious sometimes.
I will say as well, one of my favourite bits in that song is that little moment where the bass goes ba-dum dum ba-dum ba-dum. It's like a fucking Seinfeld riff in the middle of this song, man. I just think it's fucking great. Look, I totally concede, just in summary, that this album's 56 plus minutes, 56 and a half minutes, right? If we were contesting that it was too long, I would say that is potentially a fair criticism, and as I've said, I would take 12 and 13 out if I had to. I do think, though, that this is a band that are I mean, they're just totally not precious about their sound. They're a band that are really determined to shake off any sort of like sense of like pigeonholing that could have possibly been going on with them. They found the whole trappings of like super rock stardom absurd. It didn't work for them on tour. It didn't work for them professionally. It was probably quite restrictive in terms of the places that they wanted to go musically. So I'm not really that surprised that they did stuff that was like difficult and awkward and maybe slightly ill-advised for in the eyes of others and most others. And we're trying to be very sort of like, you know, we're trying to be very critically pragmatic here and say, well, this could have been a perfect album if you'd cut out 10 minutes of these unnecessary songs. This band didn't really give a shit about doing that, you know. What they did do was go on like a fucking voyage of discovery with a new guitarist, a new producer. They didn't know what they were going to find, and they've said that in interviews, that one of the most exciting things about this record was they had no idea what they were going to produce. It was like a new era for them. They'd been in this sort of fairly stable lineup for a decade, well, minus Patton, you know, he was 8 years at this point. But they didn't know what was going to come out, and it sounds like an album of discovery. It sounds like an album with no guardrails, where everybody's just like, take loads of fucking chances, let's see what we do. It should have failed. It should have been a fucking mess. It should have been a disaster. And honestly, 26 fucking years later, this album still totally works for me. And I don't mean ironically at all. I think it's fucking excellent. I think it's an excellent bit of music. I think it's got all the right mix of self-awareness and general sort of earnest sort of love of gospel and silliness. It's a fluke, but it's something that makes Faith No More all the more special for me. And it's the reason that I don't feel about them the way I feel about bands like Primus and that, where I'm like, right, okay, yeah, that's cool, whatever, don't really want to spend that much time with it. This, to me, made Faith No More something special, and made Angel Dust better, actually, because I liked this so much. It made me more open to that album, and even some parts of Real Thing, and certainly Album of the Year. So, yeah, I think it's fucking wonderful. I think it's horribly overlooked. Even just on a song-by-song basis, you can put it up against alt-rock, punk metal of the era, and it's better. To, you know, pound for pound.
I mean, you say that, but I mean, it still sold 1.5 million copies worldwide.
Yeah, which was like, what, a quarter,
I mean,
a
it's
fifth
like,
of the previous album?
Yeah, it's a third of, you know, of the previous record, but compared to other bands of that time, they still sold more records than most, you know, alt-rock bands that are doing.
Yeah, but it sold a lot of those records by virtue of the albums that came before it, though, and it didn't have big singles in the same way that those albums did. I mean, albeit Dig in the Grave is quite fondly thought of, but yeah, I mean, I think the albums that came before it certainly contributed to probably at least half of those sales, man. And it didn't sell a lot at the time at all. I think it sold about 200,000 in the UK, in Europe, versus like a million and a half for the one before it. So I mean, it was met with like confusion. I think it's aged very, very well. That maybe explains why it's sort of had consistent sales over the years. I don't know. I can't really summarise it, but I think it's, in the context, subjectively, compared to their other stuff, I completely stand by this as a nomination. I think it's the template for Unsung, for me anyway.
For me, this is the zenith of Patton, Gould and Borden's songwriting prowess together. They're like you said, Chris, they're taking chances. It shows their love for music in general, which is, I think, the reason why it sort of changed with me so much. Is it's an album which, yeah, it's not afraid to take chances, that's definitely true, but it also shows they just love playing music and chucking like just a general love for different genres of music and try to make it all work. It could have failed. It could have quite easily failed. It's actually somewhat of a miracle that it didn't fail. I think that maybe Trace Perance is part of the reason why it didn't fail, because he's so accustomed to trying to wrangle various different genres together in the one song.
Absolutely, yeah.
And Patton had obviously been away doing stuff with Mr. Bungle, so as a songwriter he was getting better at juggling those various different things and also indulging his wackiest notions.
But also like flexing his vocal muscles, because he went away from singing this wah, 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 wah thing to doing all these different voices, screaming, like scatting, doing gospel, crooning, bellowing. He just did everything, and that's what Mike Patton became famous for, and it's hardly ever showcased any more comprehensively than it is in this album. Maybe California by Mr. Bungle showcases it as diversely, maybe, but certainly this would be the one I'd use if I was trying to demonstrate Ollie's range.
Well, it goes without saying that it goes in for me. I think it's a great. I think you've made a good case for it, and I think it's the best Faith No More album, probably. So
I don't even want to contest it's the best one. I understand that Dave's got a real, like, really into the previous ones, and I would totally concede that Angel Dust, the case could be made that Angel Dust is better. I think it's definitely the most unsung one, though, hands down, definitely.
Yeah, I'm not going to argue that this is unsung when it comes to Faith No More, and you can't really. I'm not going to nominate any of the others that aren't Angel Dust or The Real Thing, because I think this is the best of those, and I don't think The Real Thing and Angel Dust are unsung. Cool. I guess my issue is just that, like, when I first listened to this in the car, I went, I got to track 10 or track 11, and I was like, yeah, this is fine, I'm enjoying it. And then I just put on Angel Dust, and immediately I was like, fuck, this is better. But I'm totally aware of the fact that I totally rinsed The Real Thing and Angel Dust for years as a teenager. They were formative for me as a music fan, and I'm coming to this, dry, as it were. I have warmed to it, since first going back to it a couple of weeks ago, and I really like where it stands in the narrative arc of the band, and the fact that they don't give a fuck. So yeah, I just personally, I think it's a 7 out of 10 compared to 2 9 out of 10s that came before, but it's still a fucking really solid 7 out of 10 overall.
All right, nice one. That brings us to the Nexus.
The Nexus.
Who's first? This is the first time we're seeing Nexus tonight. Will it be the last? What do they have in store for us? Not good for
Why am I here? You're in the Nexus. This is the Nexus. For you, this is what you want.
So who chose the Nexus last time?
The Nexus was courtesy of Mr. Tommy Smith, and he chose Walt Whitman. Mark, you're a nerd. You want to tell us who Walt Whitman is?
Walt Whitman is one of the most famous American poets of all time.
There you go.
That pretty much sums it up.
There's your dinner. Right, so Faith No More was my choice, which means I take the lead. I really like this one. It's not mega long, but it's good. Faith No More features Mike Patton. Mike Patton was in the band Fantomas, who I don't think we mentioned them even once. Fucking brilliant. I'm sure we'll talk about them at some point in the future. Fantomas brought out an album called Director's Cut, where they covered a whole bunch of music from films in some real fucking style as well. One of those was the theme from The Godfather. The Godfather was directed by Francis Ford Coppola. Francis Ford Coppola's son, Roman Coppola, his debut film was named CQ. It came out in 2001. It's a comedy drama. And the official soundtrack for CQ was released on Emperor Norton Records. Just as a wee bit of side information, Emperor Norton Records also released soundtracks for Lost in Translation and The Virgin Suicides, as well as records by Air, Ladytron, Felix the Housecat, and a whole load more. Okay. Emperor Norton Records is actually named after Joshua Abraham Norton, who was also known as Norton the First Emperor of the United States. Alright, so Joshua Norton basically crowned himself Emperor of the United States from 1859 until his death in 1880. He was born in Kent, actually, in the UK, but he moved to San Francisco in, I think, about 1848, 1849 when his parents died. And he was a speculator, financial speculator, investor. He lost a fortune investing in Peruvian rice, which the story of that is in itself actually quite fascinating, because it was to do with some kind of rice blight in China. So he put loads of money into Peruvian rice thinking, I'll get rich, and then he didn't realise just quite how much rice they had. Anyway, when that happened, there was some sort of legal case where he fought to try and avoid losing all his investment. he lost in court, and he basically vanished off the radar. He was just seen as this burnt out investor that had lost all his cash. Well, he reappeared in 1859, declaring himself the Emperor of the USA. I don't quite know how he was declaring himself that, but he made a big thing of declaring himself as the Emperor, right? And actually, he was from San Francisco. He lived in San Francisco, and city residents began to kind of entertain this. He was quite an endearing figure. And so some of his rules that he would pass, so he decreed that there would be a $25 fine for anyone that referred to San Francisco as Frisco, which I believe is still to this day quite a popular sort of bugbear amongst San Franciscans. He also at one point called for the dissolution of Congress, no doubt because he was a bit disaffected with his loss of money. The city of San Francisco at one point awarded them custody of two famous stray dogs from the city, one called Lazarus and the other called Bummer. Hell of a name. He was also in some ways quite an admirable figure. He appeared at public rallies to oppose anti-Chinese rhetoric of the likes of the Working Man's Party of California, which is quite a sort of xenophobic workers' party at the time. At one point, he eventually met with Emperor Pedro II of Brazil. He was also the only... this was a bit of a diss, but he was the only US leader, inverted commas, ever formally recognised by Kamehameha of Hawaii. That was mainly because he fucking hated the USA, so they decided to recognise Emperor Norton. And eventually he dropped dead in a street corner in San Francisco in 1880. So Emperor Norton, during his time alive, repeatedly wrote letters to Queen Victoria of England suggesting that they should get married to promote harmony between the UK and the USA. Needless to say, that never actually happened, right? Queen Victoria of England actually sent the first ever transatlantic message via Morse code in 1858 between herself and President James Buchanan. Morse code was invented by Samuel Morse, and Samuel Morse featured in the 1940s series of famous Americans stamps alongside Walt Whitman.
Hey.
But by the way, Samuel Morse, I didn't realise this. Have you ever seen Gangs in New York?
Yeah.
You know the nativist party in Gangs in New York, the whole Tammany Hall nativist party thing. Samuel Morse was part of the New York City nativist party. He was a vehement anti-Catholic campaigner, hated them, and famously refused to remove his hat in front of the Pope during a visit to New York City, which caused a lot of scandal. Apparently a real prick.
There you go. Mark, next if you want.
Yeah, sure.
Is this the fastest Nexus ever, Mark?
It's definitely in contention. So Trace Bruans is a guitar player on this record. He was also in Mr. Bungle with Mike Patton and Trevor Dunn. Trevor Dunn plays bass on an album by John Zorn called On Leaves of Grass, which is inspired by the poems of Walt Whitman.
That is quick.
Bosh. Also, absolute bosh. Mike Patton released John Zorn stuff though, didn't he? On Epic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, I'm pretty sure that Mike Patton's a Walt Whitman fan. Patton's been known as being quite a foodie. And there's an interview kicking about online where he's talking about having friends over and cooking for them and stuff like that, and what wines he likes to drink and shit. And he speaks about Walt
and shit. By the way, that and shit. Even though you didn't mean it with Patton, that has extra significance, right?
Yeah. But he speaks about Walt Whitman in that interview, and he also has a degree in English Lit, which in America there's a 90% chance that Walt Whitman would feature in any degree.
Absolutely. Yeah. Dave, you got one?
Yeah. So I mean, I actually just quickly changed it there because I managed to fit in something a bit weird. But so I've got a little interview here. Faith No More getting interviewed on UK MTV in 1995, and it's the MTV Coca-Cola report. So obviously just some sort of random corporate little advert thing, and they're just chatting shit. It's been taped off VHS and put onto YouTube. Coca-Cola is a large drinks company based in Atlanta, United States, and in 2012 they presented and produced a short 3D computer animated short film called The Polar Bears, which is produced by Ridley Scott, written by David Reynolds, and it's based on Coca-Cola's iconic polar bears, released on YouTube on 2012, and it's like,
Oh, can I stop you for 2 seconds? By the way, did you know that Ridley Scott basically always, like, he got famous doing adverts,
Yep.
and he did the Hovis advert, the
Yeah.
famous
Yeah,
Hovis
yeah.
advert of the kid pushing a bike up a hill. I only found that out like 2 weeks ago. It fucking blew my mind, man.
He did the famous Apple one
So-
as well. The one,
yeah, the big 1984
big
one.
1984 Apple one with the Mac. Yeah.
Sorry, man. That just I'm so glad we got to fucking shoehorn that fucking weird Ridley Scott fact in.
No, well, that's quite alright. So, yeah, it's like a little 7-minute plot about a family of polar bears to make you want to drink Coca-Cola. Some of the polar bears were voiced by Megan Price, Jonathan Adams, Lin-Manuel Miranda, and Armie Hammer.
Oh,
All right.
Now, Armie Hammer
Cancelled.
is
cannibal.
recently been in the news for sending texts to a woman saying that he quite fancies eating her. So, you know, that's interesting.
I think that's romantic.
But Armie Hammer appeared in The Man from U.N.C.L.E. 2015 remake of the classic 60s sort of spy thriller TV series. Fucking loved The Man from U.N.C.L.E. when I was a kid, by the way. It was amazing. That film was written, I believe, or no, executive produced by David Dobkin, the American director who's done such varied delights as Shanghai Nights, Wedding Crashers, and Eurovision Song Contest: The Story of Fire saga.
That's so bad. So bad, that film.
David Dobkin went to high school with a couple of other filmmakers, including Spike Jonze, Jeff Tremaine, who they obviously met and chatted about Jackass, and they went to high school at Walt Whitman High School in Maryland,
Oh, nice.
which is a public high school in Bethesda, Maryland, and it is named in honor of Walt Whitman.
Fantastic.
I don't want to be a pure prick, but I think it's Maryland.
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 Yeah, well,
I think
they've
think
made that
is.
up. It's Maryland. Maryland
it should-
chicken.
Yeah, absolutely. They got it wrong. I agree. Cool. Job done. So where does that leave us? What are we going to do next week?
Well, it's surely fucking time for ABBA Mixtape.
ABBA fucking mixtape.
It's gotta be
this
done.
has been 3 years in the making.
Yeah.
3 fucking years. He's paid for it, or at least 0.001% he is paid for it. So the rest of you are getting it. You're like all those people that want to be the one not to get the vaccine but just get herd immunity, aren't you? Okay.
All right. Well, great. Fucking ABBA. See you next week. Flares, glitter, disco pants.
I'm going to get that mad haircut. I mean, my hair's grown, so I could just cut the fringe straight in.
Please do
and
that.
I'd be laughing.
Please do that.
Yeah, like Benny. Cool. I mean, that is going to be some fun listening.
Oh, yeah.
I'm totally into that.
Oh, yeah.
What's Swedish for goodbye? I don't know. We'll find out. IKEA.